Hi, everybody. I am so excited for this interview today. I get to interview Jackie Baxter in Scotland, the host of the Long COVID podcast. And not only is Jackie a wealth of information, but today we get to celebrate and hear about her recovery from COVID 5 months. Is that right, Jackie?
Oh gosh, something like that.
Well,
um,
welcome. So happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's very strange being on this side of the microphone.
Well, you're doing great so far. So, Jackie, please start out for those who are not familiar with your story. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with long COVID before we get to your recovery story?
Sure. So I'll try give you the sort of brief version, because there is the whole version in much, much, much more detail if people do want to follow that up. So yeah, I think the story always starts before long COVID. So before I got ill, I was 30. I was quote unquote completely fit, extremely healthy, all of those things that we thought we were at the time. I was living an extremely full, active life. I was working every hour of the day. I was doing a lot of commuting. I spent every free moment out exercising. I was running, I was cycling, I was up the mountains, I was doing all of these things. So, sort of, very, very, very busy, but that was just life. I didn't know anything else. I got sick right at the start of the pandemic, so I was at the start of the sort of official pandemic. I was March 2020, so I was actually ill about a week before the official lockdown in the UK.
Mm.
And initially, because there were quote unquote hardly any cases in Scotland at the time, I didn't actually associate my illness with COVID to start with. I didn't have any of the symptoms we were told to look out for. I just had what I thought was a stomach bug. So I was thinking, oh my goodness, I can't be ill now. I have a really busy week. Anyway, long story short, things developed into what clearly was COVID. And that's certainly what the paramedics said when my partner called them out because he thought I was dying. So that was not a great start. So yeah, I had a lot of unpleasant symptoms to start with. I had a lot of breathlessness, high heart rate. This went on and on and on. Went into this thinking, oh, okay, this is COVID. Okay, well, that's not very nice, but I've got nothing to worry about because I'm, you know, young, fit, and healthy, and I don't have any of the things that we've been told to look out for. It wasn't anything that really worried me. Um, but over time, it did start to get more worrying because I didn't get better. The sort of acute infection, I did improve eventually after about sort of 4, 5, 6 weeks. I was pottering around the house. Someone then said, oh, well, yeah, just start increasing your activity. So I started thinking, oh, okay, brilliant. Got back on my bike, was really struggling with this because my breathlessness was so bad. So I just started, carrying on pushing myself, which actually did work to start with. I was able to do more and more and more and more over the next sort of couple of months until I hit a really, really hard wall a couple of months later. And that was kind of when long COVID really kicked in. Although at that point we weren't calling it long COVID because I'm not sure if the term actually existed, but it certainly wasn't sort of widely known at that point. So at that point, I sort of thought, this this is weird. I thought I was getting better. Basically, we just need to keep doing the same things we were doing. So I kept pushing and I kept pushing and I kept pushing. And, you know, I would have days where I thought that things were getting better. And then I would hit the deck again. So it was this sort of really confusing time of I don't know what's going on with me. Um, and this sort of went on for quite a long time. But the sort of main symptoms that I was having, the breathlessness was awful. but intermittently awful. The heart rate was awful, but not all the time. There were times where I would like struggle to get out of bed, and actually like going to the bathroom would take me like half an hour before my heart rate dropped at all. But then there were some days where I was able to like cycle 10 kilometers around the park. So it was like there was no kind of logic to it, or
Mm.
no logic to it that I could see at the time. Fatigue was awful, but sometimes it wasn't. They were the sort of main symptoms early on. There were all sorts of others that cropped up over time. What the chest pain was possibly one of the more concerning ones for me, because that's kind of in our genetic makeup, isn't it, that we're worried about chest pain. And that one really persisted. The fatigue, the breathlessness, heart rate spikes. I had weird intermittent nausea some of the time. Brain fog and stuff wasn't too bad most of the time. It would hit me when I got tired and I would struggle to find words, but that wasn't too bad. But the sort of cognitive exhaustion, I found physical exhaustion very easy to sort of predict and understand.
Um,
We know that if we do too much physically, then we get tired. And with long COVID, too much is often brushing our teeth. But we sort of understand that on a bit more of a level. But the other exhaustion were the ones that I struggled to understand. So like spending a few minutes sending emails, that can't make me tired, right? Reading a book, all these things that you just take for granted. So those were the ones that sort of were harder for me to understand, and something that I did a lot of was reading, and suddenly I was really struggling with that. And it was also something that I really wanted to do, because I wanted to try and work out what was going on with me. And the way to do that was to read things, except I was really struggling to do that. That would wipe me out. And then possibly the most surprising was the sort of emotional sort of exhaustion.
mm,
So if my partner and I would have an argument, or he would say something that upset me, he probably had the best will in the world, but he often managed to put his foot in it even without trying, even when he was trying. And if I would get annoyed at him, again, that had the potential to wipe me out. So it was all of these sort of apparently weird and wonderful symptoms that were just all over the place.
mm,
I'm trying to think what else I had. Definitely the sort of motion sensitivity tended to hit me.
mm,
Not so much the light and sound, but definitely the motion.
mm,
The COVID toes, that was that wasn't a lot of fun. I think that's all the main ones. I might think of some more later, but certainly the main ones I think we've got. So yeah, that was kind of sort of how it went, and these kind of waves, riding the corona coaster, thinking you're getting better, and then thinking, oh no, I'm not. And it just being this sort of, yeah, bewildering sort
mm,
of experience where you just don't understand.
mm.
So if you don't understand, what can you do other than what I thought I was doing, which was completely the wrong thing, as it turned out to be, trying to push myself through it. But it
Uh,
was all I'd ever known up to that point, was to just keep calm, carry on kind of thing.
oh man. So I mean, that was I mean, long haul, right? I mean, it just kept going. And like
Yeah.
you said, the Corona coaster, I mean, geez, it's just those of us that have been there know it. It's exhausting and we're trying
Mm,
so hard. And so there's that pushing that often makes it worse. And then
mm.
throughout this, which years, you are running the Long COVID podcast. So you're gathering all this information. And as we know, there are so many paths to recovery. And here you are pulling in all this information and trying a ton of different methods, I'm sure. What would you say were the ones that really stuck for you that contributed to your recovery?
Yeah, I mean, once I sort of started speaking to people through the podcast, that was where I started to get these kind of threads of
Mm,
what was going on, and I was trying to piece these things together. And I still to this day have this like amazing like flow diagram, spider diagram thing in my head of all these things and how they all connect to each other. And I keep thinking like I should write a book. But anyway, it hasn't happened yet. Maybe it will one day. You know, I'm an answers person. I need to know things. And I think my counselor said that this is one of my greatest strengths and also my greatest weaknesses. Um, and I think she's kind of right, because I just, I need to know things. And in order to find things that help, you need to know what you're looking for. But also I can definitely go down kind of rabbit holes that maybe it would be better to stay out of sometimes. Yeah, so I think possibly the first thing that I found was more by accident than design. And this was about a year on from getting sick. So I'd spent basically a year trialing and erroring things that basically wasn't working. It was making me worse, but at the time I sort of thought it wasn't. So yeah, I discovered breathing, which sounds ridiculous because like, do we not all breathe anyway? Like, I think this is a thing that we kind of fundamentally do, right? Yeah, it was completely by chance. One of my friends saw an Instagram post by somebody who said, I can help your long COVID with breathing. And I was like, whatever. But at the same time, I was like, well, I haven't found anything else that worked. So shall I give it a try? So I signed up with this guy, and he was absolutely brilliant in so many ways, actually. So what I discovered was that my breathing was dysfunctional. So, it was basically wrong. I was mouth breathing. I suspect I was in some form before I got ill. I don't know. I will never know unless I develop a time machine. But I think a lot of people were, and I think I probably was. So I was breathing through my mouth. I was hyperventilating, and a lot of this had been massively exacerbated by COVID. So I suspect I wasn't mouth breathing all the time before COVID, and I wasn't hyperventilating as bad as I was beforehand. But certainly it was possibly something that was there anyway. So yeah, step one was really fixing my breathing pattern to make it functional rather than dysfunctional. So this was a bit of an eye-opener, because I was just like, how can you like improve your health by breathing? I'd always thought that like, if you got sick, you went to the doctor, they gave you a pill, you got better. That was my experience up to that point. So I wasn't disbelieving it, and then suddenly I come across this guy who's like, oh, I teach yoga and breathing and I can improve your health. Really? But yeah, as it turns out, yes, he was absolutely correct. So yeah, it was really making my breathing functional. But then once it was functional, it was using the breath to influence the autonomic nervous system, which I was starting to learn about at this point. So like up to this point, I had never heard of it. Did not know it existed. Didn't really know that much about how my body worked, because it's not my area, and do I really need to know? Up to that point I hadn't really needed to know. So just starting to understand actually what the autonomic nervous system was, and how this kind of what this meant for me and my body and what my body was doing, and all of these things. So yeah, using the breath to kind of influence that, to calm my nervous system, to try and flip it back into the rest and digest, into that healing response, which I clearly wasn't in if I was hyperventilating all the time. So that was something that was absolutely huge. And it was huge, but it was also the first thing that I found that helped. And this is something I've noticed with people that I've spoken to, that first thing is so key. So that was my first thing, was breathing. And it tied in with that kind of like education piece where I was kind of learning what was going on. And it also led me into sort of yoga nidra and gentle yoga. So being able to do movement, but in a much safer way. So what I'd been doing up to that point was, trying to do far too much. It was a lot less than I'd been doing prior to COVID. So I thought, well, I'm doing less, so surely that's okay. No, it wasn't. So the yoga was allowing me to sort of move in a safe way. It was online, so if I got tired halfway through the class, I could just turn it off and lie down. But the yoga nidra, I think, possibly was even more key than the gentle yoga, because this really, I was talking earlier about the cognitive exertion versus the physical exertion. And I think to physically rest, I was going to say it's easy. I'm not sure it's easy as such, especially to people who are used to being kind of active and doing things. It certainly didn't come particularly easily to me, but it's certainly much more straightforward to physically rest because you just stop. You lie down or you sit down or whatever. But the cognitive rest was something that I didn't understand the concept of it at all. And I'm now starting to learn more about the brain and certainly about my brain. And I don't know if I'm actually kind of fitting the ADHD criteria, but I think I'm tending in that direction. I have a very busy brain. It doesn't turn off very easily. I'm sort of hugely creative, hugely like spouting out ideas here, there, and everywhere. And I love that about my brain. I think, it's one of the things that I really like about myself. But I'm also starting to learn that it's not healthy to be like that all the time. And also that like other people's brains aren't like that, which was a bit of a surprise as well, because I thought everyone was like this.
And,
So the yoga nidra really allowed me to turn that off.
and I want to just say one thing, which is that busy brain that some of us have and is exacerbated by what's happening in society right now. I mean, it's just so imposed on us, right? And yoga nidra you speak of, for those that aren't familiar, isn't just a calming of the body, but like you were saying, a calming of the cognitive piece and focusing the mind. So I think that's really cool. And yoga nidra was really important and had an impact on me as well. So keep going.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I think like any skill, because I've definitely heard people say, "Oh, I tried that and it didn't work." And like to be fair, my first few experiences of it were kind of like that too, because you lie down and you put your headphones on and maybe you snuggle under your blanket or you get comfy in whatever way you want to do. And this voice starts talking at you and telling you to focus on this and not focus on that, and listen to this waterfall, and or sense this part of your body, or whatever it's guiding you to do. And I was sort of lying there and I was just like, what am I having for my dinner? Oh, this hurts, I've got this symptom, I'm really worried about this. And then the voice would be like, bring your attention back to your breath. And I was like, oh, well, I didn't even realize that I wasn't, kind of thing. I couldn't do it to start with. But I did persist, and over time it got easier. I was able to focus more on the things that I was supposed to be focusing on and thinking less about what was for tea. But even now, like, this is something that I've tried to build into my sort of post COVID lifestyle, because I've realized that my brain is very busy, and actually that's great, but also I need to be very aware of that and know how to turn it off and when to turn it off. So I still use it now, not as much as I should, but I still do. And my brain still wanders, but I kind of, I'm much better at doing it without judgment now and being like, oh, okay, we're thinking about dinner. Okay, well, let's not think about dinner for a while. Let's go back to the breathing. Let's go back to the whatever. So yeah, I found that really, really helpful. And it would just, I'd kind of know when I needed to do it as well, over time. So that there were the first two things. And I think the other big thing for me was cold water. So this was something, again, that breathing guy suggested. And I sort of was just like, no, that sounds horrendous. Like, no, thank you. He was like taking pictures of himself, like jumping in cold water near where he lived. And I was just like, on you go, mate. Absolutely no thanks. And then I think it was about 2 years in. So by this point, I'd seen a lot of improvement in symptoms through what I was doing. So the breathing, the yoga nidra, the just generally doing less. Other things I was trying. I'm not sure if there were other things I was trying. Things were better, but it was because I was kind of doing less. And I was basically realized I was putting myself through like autonomic boot camp. So I had all of these things I was doing. So I did my yoga, I did my breathing, I did my yoga nidra, and then I did my this, and I sort of went back round. And sometimes I would do some journaling, and that might be helpful. And it was this kind of like like boot camp. And I water gave me was a bit of joy back in my life. So I realized that, feeling slightly better, I mean, yes, absolutely, that's good. But that's what I wanted. I wanted to be feeling better. But actually, what's the point of feeling slightly better if you don't do anything? It was almost like I would rather have had some of the troughs if I got some of the highs as well.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, the cold one. I mean, I've always been an outdoor person. The outdoors is so important to me, and being able to be up in the hills and all of these things, and being able to get into the water, it wasn't the same, but it was getting me a bit of that nature, a bit of that outdoors. Um, but like, the first time we're really lucky here. We've got Loch Ness just down the road. So it's not that hard to get to. We don't have to travel for hours, it's right there. So we went down one evening. It was April time, I think, might have been the beginning of May. So the water was sort of warming up a little bit, but not very much, And I remember I
You
sort
know
of
how cold it was about? Do you have any idea?
It was probably double figures, but only just. So this is obviously UK, we're in Celsius. It was probably about 10-ish.
Okay.
Um, so it gets a bit colder in the winter, a bit warmer in the summer, but Loch Ness doesn't change that much because it is absolutely massive.
Right.
So yeah, I got in and, you know, sort of very, 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 very slowly got Malky to take the picture and then got straight back out again and was like, whew, you know. But once I'd kind of put all my clothes back on and sort of recovered, I thought, I feel better. Like, I do have more energy. I do feel more alive. And it didn't last. But I kept doing it because I am nothing if not stubborn. So, I would go back, a couple of times a week, 3 times a week, 4 times a week sometimes. And over time, the benefits lasted longer. I had more energy. I'd feel clearer headed. Just be able to do more with less consequences over time. And just, being able to be outside was huge, in a way that was healthy rather than a way where I sort of got back home and thought, overdone it again. I never, in all the time that I went cold swimming, felt worse
Mm.
after I got out than before. I know some people say that they get in and like the warming up gives them a PEM crash. I've never found that personally, but I was very careful to listen to my body when I went in. So if I was feeling really bad when I went in, I would stay in a lot less time. Whereas if I was feeling relatively okay, I might be able to swim around a bit. And over time, I did start swimming further and staying in for longer. And as the water warmed up in the summer, I was actually staying in for much longer. And I think it was wonderful. It gave you were able to move, but again, in a kind of supported, safe way, because you are being very supported in the water. You've also got the compression, you're very good for inflammation, your nervous system, all of these benefits that I'm not going to go into because we all know them. But it was just absolutely huge for me, the cold water. And I still do it now. It's still a huge part of my life now. So, we're off climbing mountains and I'm like, right, there's a loch down there. We need to go in there. And poor Malky's like, oh, for goodness sake. But he loves it too, a
Uh,
little bit, a little bit.
I mean, I'm huge on cold water soaking. I did not start in big open water like you. I started in the shower, but for me, it seemed like in addition to all the physiological benefits, it was so empowering. Like I do it,
Yeah.
like I did that. I
Yes.
accomplished that. I mean, it was this
Yeah.
evidence of that I could do something like that and come away feeling very empowered. So many benefits.
Mm,
Big on cold water exposure. So super cool.
yeah.
Oh, so great. So, okay, you've got breathing, you got yoga nidra, cold water exposure. I mean, what would you say was maybe the catalyst or the turning point in, you did that for quite some time, but then you said maybe it was about 5 months ago that you sort of turned a corner. What do you think that was?
Yeah, I've got a couple of theories. I mean, I was doing all of these things over time. I was, gradually doing more, pushing at boundaries. I'm I'm the sort of person that would rather try something and regret it than not do it and regret not doing it, kind of thing. So, I probably had more crashes than maybe some people. I don't know, or maybe I didn't, but that's certainly what I felt, was that, I overdid it a lot. But I also, every time I overdid it, I learned more about myself, what I can do and when, and being active in some way was so important to me. So it was, some of the time it was kind of like, well, it's mental health versus physical health. Actually, I need to do something. So if it's going to make me feel worse physically, then actually that might be worth it in order to get that kind of mental health boost. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but that was certainly how I felt some of the time, that actually the payoff was kind of worth it. So yeah, I'd got to this point where I was kind of, pushing at boundaries, seeing improvement some of the time, and overdoing it, and all of these things. And it was at my beginning of this year where I got a career break from work. So I'd been initially allowed to work from home, and then I'd gone into sick pay, and then I'd run out of all of that. And I was kind of at this kind of like crossroads where I was like, oh, what do I do now? Like, I do feel quite a lot better, but I don't feel like I can go back to my job in the way that it would be expected. I wouldn't be able to do it properly. I'd be letting them down, I'd be letting myself down, and also I would be making my health worse by kind of forcing myself into that too soon. So I was able to take this career break for just over a year, and that kicked in early this year. And I think I didn't realize until this happened how much stress I had been getting from this job that I wasn't doing. So I was very much, it was, here's a sick note because I can't do this. No, I can't do my job. No, there are things I can do, but actually doing that and everything that's involved with that, I can't. Here's another sick note because I can't. And it was, it was very much weighing on my brain, I think, without me really realizing it. And in hindsight, it's kind of obvious that this would be quite a stressful thing. But at the time, I was just not really thinking about it. And then when this career break kicked in, and suddenly I was able to focus on what I could do rather than what I couldn't, I think was this like, it kind of, literally felt it lifting off my shoulders. I know that sounds really ridiculous, but I almost did feel something kind of shift at that point where it kicked in. And I was like, okay, now I can think about what I can do. I can look for work that I can do. I can, all of these things. It felt like such a huge moment. And actually, interestingly, I completely hit the deck quite soon after that with what I think was a stomach bug rather than a relapse. I'm not 100% on that, but definitely that point was a huge turning point. That just, it kind of allowed me to, I don't even know, like push different boundaries, push different edges, and work out what was going, or even just think forwards rather than sort of backwards. I don't know, it's quite hard to describe, but I think that was quite a big thing for me. One of the other things that happened at that point was that I actually did Susie Bolt's Fern program. So Susie and I had actually had a conversation around about that point on the podcast, at which point we then discussed the Fern, and she was just like, I think this might help you. And I was like, hadn't even considered it, but now I shall consider it. And I thought, well, why not? I'll give it a go. And I think it was almost like it confirmed in my mind a load of things that I actually already knew. But Susie has this wonderful way of kind of packaging things in a kind of, here you go, kind of way, that here you go, what do you think of that, kind of thing, without trying to force you into any kind of thing. It's almost like she suggests stuff and then you go away and you're like, huh. So this kind of, there were lots of things that she was saying that I did kind of know. There were things that she talked about that I didn't. It was very, very useful, I think, in allowing me to kind of see life beyond the illness. Because I think by this point I'd been ill for 3 years. And, 3 years compared to somebody who's been ill for 10 is the blink of an eye. But for me, three, it was such a long time. It was almost like I couldn't remember not being ill.
Mhm.
So I'd got myself to this point where I was a lot better than I was, but it was almost like because I was so much better, I was so scared of making myself worse again. Um, I didn't want to overdo, I was like, well, I haven't had a relapse for a bit. So, I
Or-
don't, should I do that thing? Because, so it was in this kind of sort of should I, shouldn't I? I'm not quite sure where I am. In hindsight, I was so much better than I thought I was.
Mhm.
But at the time I kind of, it felt so fragile. I'd
Mhm.
seen so much improvement, but that's happened before. I've had good days before, and we know what happens after good days. We get bad days. So it was, yeah, it really allowed me to kind of see what might happen beyond, to be able to kind of consider life beyond. Um, so I think at that point, it was a good thing for me to have done at that point. And actually coming out of that, shortly after that, I think it was, I sort of, I had this realization where I thought, I don't think I'm sick anymore. Like, I'm not better. I'm not recovered because I've still got this and that and this, all these things. But I'm not sure that I actually could say I had long COVID anymore. What I now can do is move into this kind of liminal space of the in between, which felt quite weird, because I'd been sick for so long. And this allowed me to kind of sit there and go, okay, so what is there still going on here? And one of my gifts from COVID, let's say, is that I have a lot of anxiety. And I think I probably had more anxiety before COVID than I realized I did, but I'm much more aware of it now. And it certainly is affecting me in a way that it didn't appear to before. I think before I just covered it up by doing stuff. So I thought, well, if I'm this anxious about all of these things, I don't think I can call myself recovered. Understanding kind of trauma and mental health and all of the impact of, this experience on that, I thought, there's quite a lot of stuff there to work through. But it was almost like once I was in this space, I could stop thinking about all of the symptoms and the chest pain. Actually, the chest pain was still sort of persisting, but most of the other stuff, and kind of focus on the things that were left. And I think I was in that kind of space for maybe about a month. And I was able to just, because I didn't see myself having long COVID anymore, it was like, well, I could try doing that then, because that didn't work before when I wasn't well. But maybe I could try some of these things, and going out and just doing a bit more, getting a bit more confidence in my body, and think, and understanding what my body was now. Because I think this, maybe this is something we can talk about as well, but that me now is totally different to me before. There's a lot of commonalities, but there's a lot of differences as well, and I think they're differences for the better. But it's kind of like trying to compare like with like. It's like, well, how do I measure recovered, because recovered is so different. So yeah, I mean, the sort of recovered moment was about a month later, I think, after that. So by that point I'd sort of, yeah, worked more on these things, understood a little bit more, pushed some more boundaries, and they'd been okay. And I was actually being interviewed by somebody else, and we were talking about all the things that I'd learned through my journey. And I'd said one of the things that I had learned was that I was a perfectionist, which wasn't a surprise to me. I knew that already, but it was understanding how being a perfectionist can be a good thing in some circumstances. I think in order to be a musician or creative in any way, I think you do need to be a bit of a perfectionist. But also in terms of sort of life and healing, perfectionism is very much not helpful. And I was explaining this to Laurie and all of these things that I'd learned, and I was just like, oh my goodness, duh. Like, I'm doing it again here, aren't I? And she just laughed at me, because I realized that I was seeing recovery as this like holy grail where everything is perfect. And, I had this, this idea of what it would be like. And then, like, nobody's perfect. Like, I was just this kind of like, oh my goodness. So after this interview, I went next door, and my partner, I think, was still working, and I was like, Malky, and he's like, what? I'm still working, go away. And I was like, Malky, I'm recovered. And he was like, yeah, I know. So it was almost like he'd kind of worked it out before I had. So at
Oh,
that point, it was just like, oh, okay. And now I need to work out how I feel about this. And that was the start of a whole nother journey. And it's
oh,
almost something I've realized after this. I've now been sort of recovered for what, 4 or 5 months. And it's almost like, recovery was the goal. That's what I wanted. That's what everyone wants, and absolutely, I'm not disagreeing with that. But it's almost like that was the start. And that's now where I've been able to work out, okay, so what is life now? And
right.
I'm
Right. Oh
I'm
my.
a bit more sure on that now than I was 5 months ago, but I'm still working that out. And
Well,
it's
I
it's
love
fun.
this theme that I'm hearing and this thread that began some months ago of getting the leave from work that sort of opened up some room for you to see how you were going to be in this environment and releasing a little bit of the control that, like me, I like to find answers and figure it out and get to the bottom of it. But it's so much of it is letting go of that and releasing that perfectionism and that control and surrendering to just being. And now that you're recovered, okay, I'm recovered, but now what does that look like? Does it look like this, which is what you had thought it would look like? Well, maybe not. Maybe
It's
I
more
yeah, it's all
like
of
this.
this, and how can I move into that gracefully and accept it? And that's okay. So tell me more about what that feels like being in this new space and allowing yourself to be here without expectations.
Yeah, I think actually something that I didn't mention in the things that helped me that probably should have been in there was starting to speak to a counsellor.
Mm,
And I started speaking to her, it was probably about 2 years ago. So maybe 18 months or so through my journey. And she's been hugely helpful throughout my illness, but like since. And without wanting to sound like I'm moaning about recovery, because I am absolutely not, like, I got what I wanted. um, but the post recovery, it's been so much harder than I thought it was going to be. It was almost like, yeah, I had this like holy grail moment of like, this is what recovery is going to look like. And then once you actually step into that space, it's, I don't know. I remember someone saying when you become chronically ill that you have to learn your new body. And that was something that it took me quite a long time to do. But it's almost like when you come out of it the other side, you've got to do that all over again. And and it's been really strange. So I think, one thing for me, exercise and being outdoors and all of these things is so important to me, and it always has been. So for me, it was kind of like right now, instead of sort of like doing what I can and sometimes doing too much and all of these things, it's been like right now I can actually think about fitness. So it was kind of switching into that. Okay, so I'm not a sick person anymore, so I have to think like an unfit healthy person, which was very weird because I sort of ran out the door and I was like, right, I'm going to go run a 5k. And 30 seconds down the road, I wasn't going to run a 5k. I just kind of like thought, well, I'm better now, so I can do the things I could do before. And, I can now, but at the time I couldn't. So it's taken me a while to kind of build things up. And yeah, it was frustrating to start with, but at the same, every time I got frustrated.
And do you want to really go back to those patterns that
Mm,
potentially contributed to being sick anyway? That for me was I don't know if you
yeah.
can identify with this, that once I was healthy, it was like, okay, do this, and it's like, wait a second, I have to make sure that I'm going to just bring forward the things that I know are going to contribute to my life, and maybe leave behind those ones that weren't that helpful after all.
Yeah.
It's so
Oh,
easy to
totally.
back into the groove and think you can do everything, which you could, but yeah, it might not be the best. Best.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a much better appreciation for balance in my life than I did before. Again, I'm still trying to work this out. At the moment, I'm working quite a lot of evenings, and
Mm,
I need to remember that that means I don't work mornings or that I don't work afternoons, or that to take that time off. Um, and yeah, really understanding that yeah, it's absolutely okay to go and absolutely smack my body to the wall and go and do massive walks and do all of this stuff. That's okay if I'm fit enough to do it, but not every day.
mm,
So we do that one day, and then maybe the next day we go for a swim, or we do something else. We balance it out. Whereas before it was very much like do all the time, even if I didn't feel like it. So yeah, I think as you say, recognizing some of those patterns that weren't healthy, things like the perfectionism, things like the constant need for busyness.
mhm.
I feel that, even I feel myself slipping into some of those some of the time. I've been setting up my own business recently with the breathing, and there's a lot of setup when you're doing something like that. So it's been like to-do lists and all of this stuff, and it's there's been a lot. And I thought, well, this I need to be aware of this, because this is the sort of stuff that can get out of hand. But at the same time, when you're setting up a business, there is a lot. So, I was working quite a lot of hours. I was doing quite a lot. And then when the course started last week, it was almost like as soon as the first course started, it was like, okay, now we can breathe. And then I took the next day off
Good.
after that. So I think, yeah, it's recognizing, hard work, long hours, if it's in the short term, it's probably okay. If it stretches out and carries on over, if it becomes a pattern, that's where it's not okay. And that was the position I was very much in before. And knowing like when to say no, boundaries is something that I've learned. I'm not always good at them, but I'm so much better at them. So yeah, yeah, it's been really, really interesting just trying to kind of, I was going to say piece together my life. That sounds a bit tragic. But just trying to put it together and work out what it is and what I want. And I'm much better at saying what I want now. I
Mm,
think before I was a bit of a people pleaser, and I would say yes to everything, and I was definitely a yes person. And really kind of yeah, not really putting myself first. Whereas now I'm much better at doing that. I'm much better at saying I want to do this. No, I can't do that. Yes, I would love to do that, but it needs to be next week because I've got too much on today. These things that I'm much better at kind of advocating for myself. And but I think like everything, it's work in progress, because nobody's perfect, which is something that I'm having to learn, because that was kind of the point, wasn't it? Nobody's perfect. Health is important, so there are still things that I need to be working on. My anxiety levels are a lot better than they were, or I'm definitely able to deal with them better when they spike now. But that's still something that I can work on. I still want to be healthier. I still have all these things. So it's like I was saying, recovery is almost like the point where I've now been able to say, right, now we can think moving forwards. We can think as a healthy person. How can we be healthier? How can we be fitter, but in a healthy way? So
I
it's not so much about punishing yourself. It's allowing yourself to do these things and challenging yourself, while then giving yourself the recovery time, I think, for me.
Uh, yeah, I love it. I love that the way I'm just taking this all in is it's really everything you did for yourself while you were sick just as extending into this
Mm.
period of time. Like that was just a season of sickness. This is a new season, but it's still all the same wonderful tools of listening to yourself and slowing down and moving forward into new experiences, seeing how it feels, backing off a little bit and testing the waters. No pun intended with the cold soaking there, but that works. Um, and something else I want to circle back to though, when you said, I just love when you said, it dawned on you, what can you do, not what can't you do?
Mm.
And I know that that was a big turning point for me, was when I had one of my practitioners say to me, Amy, there's more right with you than there is wrong. And it was like, oh, and I was able to shift that perspective. And it took a lot of doing, and sort of self-coaching. What would you say for you, Jackie? Do you do, did you do then? Do you do now to remind yourself to celebrate the wins, to cheer yourself along, to say, okay, you've got this, you've got this? Is there a mantra you use? Is there something that reminds you of, hey, there's some evidence I did that today, that sort of can continue to bolster this momentum that you have?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, I love what you were saying about, I think habits only become habits if you build them into your life in a way that works. So, learning all these things and doing all these things during recovery, yeah, that's all well and good. But, then when I hit the recovery switch, I don't want to forget all of them. So yeah, as you said, building them into my life in a way that worked, in a way that was actually sustainable, I think was very important. Um, and I hope I've managed to do that. I don't do yoga as often as I did, but I also don't need to. So I think that's probably okay. Um, oh gosh, I think I was very hard on myself when what I saw as messed up. If I hit a crash and I didn't feel good, and I was just, I would always try and work out why. And it was like, right, well, did I do too much on that? Did I push that too hard? Did I do this? Did I not do enough of that? And, sometimes it was really obvious. If I'd gone for a walk and I hadn't been feeling good before I started, like, that's obvious. Some of the less obvious ones were the more frustrating, because I was like, I don't actually know what I did wrong there. And I think it's easier for me to say now than it was for me to do at the time. But the kind of sort of acceptance thing I found very useful, which is really funny because when someone first said acceptance to me, I literally wanted to punch them, because I thought that they meant I was, accepting this for life. And that was something that I don't think I was ever going to do. People were talking, people say about never losing that hope, and I think that's important. But also, I almost wonder if it wasn't the belief so much for me, if it was actually the stubbornness to like refusal to give up. Um, but I've gone off on a tangent there. Yeah, I think, yeah, the acceptance thing. It was realizing that I'm not accepting that this is me forever. I'm accepting that this is what things are like now. Um, and that's not easy to accept because there are so many things that I want to be doing right now, but that's easier for me to accept than that this is forever, for example. And that kind of allowed me to sort of stop pushing and to sort of sit back when I needed to. Um, so it was almost like kind of allowing myself to realize that I'd found the things that helped, or I'd found some things that helped. I was doing the right things. I understood what was going on. I understood what was going on my body. I understood about the nervous system. I understood about how this sort of integrated with all the other body systems, and how this all kind of worked together, or certainly what was going on for me. And it was almost like that kind of, okay, I got this kind of thing. It was, and I think I don't know, because there were so many times where I doubted that as well. Every time I hit a crash, it's just like, oh, so I was wrong. I was wrong about all of these things. The breathing isn't helping. The yoga, what am I doing wrong? I need to go and search for more things. And but then I would be like, no, well, should we try the breathing? Let's try the breathing, because it did work before. So we'd try the breathing. Like, okay, I feel slightly less awful, and it would take some days or a week or however long to pass, and then we'd start doing the things again. And yeah, sort of trying to remind myself that I did know what I was doing to some extent. I had these tools. Each time I crashed, it was a learning experience. It wasn't a complete waste. It wasn't back to square one. It was this kind of, yeah, we got this, or we got this as much as we can. let's keep doing the things that we know work. You know, maybe something will shift at some point. And I think as well, really noticing the improvement when it happened. Because this was something, I mean, I was ill for what, just over 3 years. Some people have been ill for much longer. When you're ill for a long period of time, I mean, partly you normalize things. So like, you know, it's hard to remember what feeling well actually was. But also it's so hard to see improvement when your sort of trajectory is like wiggly and all over the place. And you're like, well, actually, I'm worse than I was a month ago. And like, okay, maybe I was, but I'm better than I was 3 months ago. And
Mhm.
really understanding that this, wibbly wobbly trajectory was, once I found the things that were helping me, it was gradually going up. It was just very difficult for me to see because I was so close to it, and much easier for my partner, who was slightly detached from it, to see. He was quite good at saying to me, you are doing better. And I would be like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. I still can't do this and I still can't do that. And I can't do this. And I feel terrible today. And I've got all these symptoms and everything's awful and wah. And he'd be like, okay, but actually, this, last 2 week period, you did this, you did that, you did that. You were feeling better because of this. Compare that to the same 2 week period 3 months ago or something. And I'd be like,
Mm.
yeah, oh, okay, I don't like it, but you're right. Be very, very grudgingly kind of, but and if you were to look back, say 6 months or a year, one of the things I did on the podcast was most years I did a kind of yearly reflection kind of thing, or maybe it was my sort of COVID anniversary. It was looking back over the last year, these kind of sort of, 6 monthly or semi regularly kind of like Jackster's reflections. And actually, I found them really helpful because I was then able to go, yeah, okay, I've learned a lot. I've found more things. I'm able to do more. I'm feeling better, all of these things. So, I think anniversaries and Christmases and birthdays and all of these things, that they're these moments of reflection, and they can be quite demoralizing at times because you're like, oh, another year, fantastic. But then when you actually kind of try to look at it with a slightly more positive spin, which isn't always easy, you're able to look back and think, right, okay, yeah, okay, I'm better than I was. This kind of, yeah, sort of starting to see that improvement. And I think that's key, isn't it? It's being able to say, right, everything isn't quite right. We're still not there. There's still still a lot to go, but I can do this thing that I couldn't, or this symptom is less than it was, or whatever measure of comparison that is that you use. I can walk to the post box, I couldn't before. I can cook a meal, I couldn't before. I'm able to work a day a week, I couldn't before. Whatever it is, these like, yeah, little wins, they're so important, aren't they?
Oh, so important. I mean, it just, like you said, over a year, having those anniversaries, each month reflecting, and then each day saying, okay, hey, like even the other morning I got up and said to my husband in the kitchen, I gave him a hug and I said, I did it. And he said, what'd you do? I said, I got up. I said, it was my first success of the day. And I mean, even though I feel great now, hey, just keep on celebrating those wins and
Yeah.
reminding yourself, because it stimulates that part of the brain of, oh, this is
Mhm.
good. And then you're more apt to pick up on other wins in your life and in your body and accomplishments that you have. And oh, and Jackie, I'm just so thrilled for you and excited for you. And I want to say that the end of each interview I do, I like to laugh. And as we know, you can laugh when you hear or see something funny. You can laugh just to laugh. You can laugh at the absurdity of life, but it's really fun to laugh when you're celebrating and you're grateful for something. And right now, I just want to laugh with you, and I hope everybody that's watching can laugh with us, celebrating your recovery. Like, yes, you did this. So, you on? You willing? You're going to do this with me?
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
let's laugh for 30 seconds. Ready, set, and go.
Oh, this feels so awkward. Oh, it's so funny. Ah, brilliant.
So happy for you. Ready, set, done.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for sharing your amazing journey with us, your recovery, the good times, the bad times. I mean, and your podcast. I mean, what a just wealth of information that you share with everybody. And I'll put that in the show notes so people can find you and then hear more about your breathing work that you're going to be doing and offering. Just wonderful, wonderful contribution to the world. And to think that it all came from such shitty shit. I mean, really, God.
Really shitty shit.
Shitty shit, but way to make the
Yeah.
most of it, girl. Thank you, my friend. And I look forward to next time.
Thanks so much.